This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hello and welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. So good to have you joining us here on the show today. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com, jason@sportspectrum.com. I'd love to hear from you. Any guest ideas you have, any thoughts, feedback on today's interview with Chris Canty, the Super Bowl champion, you can reach me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com. And we are presented today by IJM, the International Justice Mission. You can check them out at ijm.org/TF, become a freedom partner, and join the fight against violence and oppression. They do such great work. Our partners here at Sports Spectrum, ijm.org/TF. Very excited today to welcome Chris Canty to Sports Spectrum. Chris was selected in the fourth round of the 2005 NFL Draft by the Dallas Cowboys, played his college ball at Virginia, was a first-round talent, but had some injuries that saw him drop to the fourth round, and he was surprised he was even taken in the fourth round, as he'll tell you here on today's show. He went on to play 4 seasons with Dallas and had some good years, specifically 2006 and 2007 in those playoff seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. And then he signed with the New York Giants, played 4 seasons in New York, and won himself a Super Bowl in his hometown with his hometown team. See, Chris grew up in the Bronx, and so going to play for the Giants, his childhood sports team, and then winning a Super Bowl in 2011, Super Bowl 46 as a member of the Giants. Signed a contract a couple years later to go play with Baltimore. Finished out his career with the Ravens after the 2015 season. Chris is now a ESPN Radio host in New York City, part of DiPietro, Canty, and Rothenberg on ESPN Radio 98.7 FM in New York City. You can hear it every day from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern. And Chris is a great guy. I've known him a long time. Met him a few different times, specifically at a church event called Iron Sharpens Iron in Hartford, Connecticut. This had to be 2010, maybe 10 years ago. And then got to see Chris again over at the Super Bowl at the Media Day in 2012 in Indianapolis. And then, of course, they go on to win the Super Bowl. So this is a fun conversation with a guy I've known for a long time. I think you'll like getting to know him as well. Chris Canty, Super Bowl champion, joins us here today on Sports Spectrum. Chris, what's happening, my friend?
Nothing much, man. Nothing much. Just enjoying the return to sports, and we got it all going now, right? We got playoff hockey, we got playoff basketball, and we got baseball going on. I mean, the NFL is getting ready to start up, so fingers crossed that all continues to go well with those sports leagues managing the pandemic. But everything is good, my friend.
What was sports talk radio like during the pandemic for you? Was it still easy, or was it even harder? Now that we have games, we can at least talk about what's happening in the world. But before that, it was hard, I got to imagine.
No, you know what? It's interesting that you brought that up and you asked that question, because I was thinking about that earlier today. Once I got off my show, I finished at 11, and I was saying to myself, I feel like from, a professional standpoint, just adding more tools in my toolbox during the pandemic was like it in a lot of ways made me a lot better as a broadcaster. Just having the opportunity to be more in depth in terms of the topics that we have, the insights that I give, but also to let people behind the curtain and let them get to know a little bit more about me. And I think that's important when you start talking about a medium like radio, because it's personal. Like, you're a part of someone's everyday routine. And so as they're listening to you, they need to have that, that personal attachment. And I think when they get to know more things about you, it just strengthens that relationship. It strengthens that bond. And I think the pandemic gave me an opportunity to kind of let my listenership know more about me.
You also won a Super Bowl in that city. So I'm wondering, just being a New York Giant, and you came in with the Cowboys. That's my team. That's how I bonded with you, and we connected. And we'll talk about your NFL career in a second. But what's it like to be a champion in New York? It's got to be, especially for you in the city that you grew up in, winning a Super Bowl title and being a champion in New York.
It's a tough place to play. but it's the best place to win. It's the worst place to lose. Everything is sensationalized in New York City. Everything is larger than life. And so to have an opportunity to come back and play for my hometown team, to get paid, and to have a parade down the Canyon of Heroes and have 3 million people lining the city streets, it was an unbelievable feeling, man. Unbelievable. What made it even, I don't know that you can make it better, but I guess the thing that was kind of like the icing on top of the cake is that I called my shot the week before we played the game. So I told one of the local reporters, I said, you know, it's going to be a hard-fought game, but tell the people back home, get ready for a parade on Tuesday. And guess what? I
remember that.
We had a parade on Tuesday, so that was pretty cool. But it's an awesome feeling, man. New Yorkers never forget the champions. And we have people that call our radio show every single day, and the first thing they'll say is, first time, long time, and they'll say, Chris, thank you for the championship.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's one of those things. It feels good, man. I mean, there are very few things that you can do once in life and be defined by for the rest of your life. Winning a Super Bowl is one of them. So it's, like I said, man, it's a blessing. All of this is a blessing, dude. Jason, all of this is a blessing.
I know, man, and we're going to talk about that. I definitely want to dive into your faith. I remember that Super Bowl specifically, though, because just like the Giants had done beforehand when they beat the Patriots the first time in 2007, they were also underdogs again in 2011, and that was in Indianapolis. I remember you coming over to our set. I don't know if you remember that, because that week is just crazy, but you came over to our set at ESPN and did a couple interviews, and I'm thinking, how does Chris Canty have time to come over to our set to do interviews? But your structure and the way that you guys were run with the Giants, I felt like your PR team and just you were very loose in saying, hey, we'll do stuff. We're not tight. We're going to keep going and do interviews like we normally would and just have as much of a normal week as possible. Is that was my view from the outside. Is that how it really was?
Yeah, I think it was, because the guys that were on that team had a quiet confidence about themselves, you know, and we had been through a lot that year. I remember there was a stretch of 4 games where we lost every single game. And people are talking about firing Tom Coughlin. And, you know, when they talk about firing the coach that won a Super Bowl, the players aren't far behind. So it was one of those things where we all banded together and we decided, you know what, we don't know what this team is capable of doing, but for the next few weeks, let's just go all in with each other. And it actually started with a chapel service the night before the Christmas Eve game against the New York Jets. And the speaker for that evening talked about being all in. And he gave each one of us a poker chip in that meeting. And to this day, I have that poker chip sitting in the case with my Super Bowl ring. Wow. And every guy on that team has that as well. And so that was just symbolic of our attitude. We were going to go all in for each other no matter what happened. And I think we resigned ourselves to being cool with whatever took place. Like if we went out there and we gave it all, you know what, so be it. We gave it an honest attempt. But it just so happened that collectively our best was good enough.
Yeah. Chris Canty's our guest here today on Sports Spectrum. Listen, I'll always identify you as a Cowboy because you were drafted by Dallas. I wonder, you played for 3 teams and you played 3 seasons with Baltimore, 4 with the Giants and 4 with the Cowboys. You won a Super Bowl with the Giants, but you're probably more identified, I have to imagine, as a Giant, although the Cowboy fan base is pretty big too.
Yeah, there are some Cowboys fans in New York City, tri-state area, that don't let me forget that I started as a Cowboy. But, I was drafted by Bill Parcells. I played for Al Groh in college, so I was already in the Parcells family, and a lot of New Yorkers had that affinity toward Bill Parcells. So it's just one of those things, man. I'm thankful to have an opportunity to play for each one of them. Believe it or not, they're all more similar than they are different. They're all well-run. People know their roles, and they do them at a really high level. And so it really wasn't a lot of an adjustment when I transitioned from each organization. Getting to know new teammates, that is what it is. But in terms of what's expected of you, the standards in the building, those are all the same.
Yeah. That's cool. Let's talk about your journey here of faith. I really want to get into that. That's honestly, when I first connected with you, it was at an event in Albany, New York. In Hartford, Connecticut. And you probably remember this, Iron Sharpens Iron. And you were there with your team chaplain, George McGovern, I think is his name, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you and George come up, and I didn't expect you to show up. I remember George was coming, and I wanted to meet him. And there's Chris Canty. I'm like, I think that's Chris Canty over there. And he had you share your testimony to a couple hundred men at this event that I was at. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. I love Chris when he played with the Cowboys, but your faith is the single most important thing in your life. Can you share a little bit about that faith, where that was rooted for you?
Well, yeah, my mother is a pastor in the United Methodist Church. She's been preaching longer than I've been alive. And the single best thing she's ever done for me is teach me that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And, she continues to remind me of that today. But it became a real thing for me when I was coming out of UVA, and I had a dislocated knee, tore 3 ligaments in my knee. And then I was out in Arizona training, decided to go out on the town with a couple of guys that were also in town training. And there was a bar fight, and I got hit in the face with a glass bottle and detached my retina. So here I am, a guy that had a high grade on him, and I'm going into the biggest job interview of my life with 50 stitches in my face, a detached retina, and a dislocated knee with 3 repaired ligaments. And I just, at that point, it was like, I don't know if I'm even capable of being the football player that I once was, but it was also in that moment where I realized that my mom and dad couldn't do anything for me. My best friends couldn't do anything for me. My girlfriend couldn't do anything for me. And it was literally just God and I in that apartment trying to work through all of the things that I'd been through and trying to chart a path forward. And, that's why my faith is so strong right now. That's why I've been able to have the career that I had playing, and I've been able to transition into doing the media because I know my foundation. I know where my strength comes from. And so, it's one of those things that I had my Damascus Road experience, like Paul had his Damascus Road experience. I had my Damascus Road experience, and that's when it really became about a personal relationship with God. Everybody, if you grow up in a household where your parents go to church, you know of God, but it's a very different thing to know of God and have a personal relationship with him. And so that's what it is for me right now. It's about trying to become the best version of myself, trying to become more of what he would have me to be. And that's in everything that I do.
What was it like to overcome? Because I remember when you were drafted, you were a 4th-round pick, and some guys
I don't even know how that happened, by the way.
Well, you were first-round talent, right?
How was I a 4th-round pick? I should not have been a 4th-round pick. I absolutely should have been an undrafted free agent. But God saw fit for me to be a part of the Dallas Cowboys. And first of all, what better place to make your name as an NFL player than with the Dallas Cowboys? But then to have a chance to be a part of a draft class with DeMarcus Ware, Marcus Spears, Kevin Burnett, Marion Barber, Jay Ratliff.
Yeah.
I mean, Jason, you can't script that any better. You know what I'm saying? You can't orchestrate that. Like that's divine. That's providence, man. So he's in everything that we do, and I don't try to Bible thump people, and be overbearing about it, but it's a real thing. But you got to also understand that God is going to walk through those things with you.
What was that like walking through your journey as an NFL player? I want to talk about Parcells and Coughlin. You go from Grow to Parcells to Coughlin. Like there's stories all day long. You could write books about, I'm sure, playing for those guys.
Oh, yeah.
But as a follower of Christ coming into the league, and you mentioned that draft class, that's one of the top Cowboy draft classes of all time. And I remember talking to Marcus Spears as well on the show and asking him, coming to the NFL, and you're playing for a guy like Parcells, who doesn't take any BS from anyone, right? And he is who he is, and he has that reputation. But you're also a man of faith, and you're kind of growing and learning, and you're 22, 23 years old coming into the league, but your faith's still important to you. How are you able to kind of balance all of that and kind of walk through that push-pull of being a football player and also being a follower of Christ?
Well, there's some bumps in the road. I mean, when you're in the NFL, especially when you're being introduced to all the things that come along with it, there's some traps in there, and you got to try to navigate all of those things. But the great part about being in Dallas is we had a lot of good vets in that locker room. Guys like Greg Ellis, guys like Leroy Glover, Jason Ferguson. Like, we had a lot of solid dudes. Kenyon Coleman, another one. An unheralded player, but a really solid dude, a glue guy in the locker room. And, it was just, you had that knowledge base to draw from. If you had a question, you could go to them and ask them, and they would be honest. They weren't the veteran type of players that would tell you something that was wrong. And so that's the part of it that I'm going to be forever grateful for, because those guys kept it 100 with us when we came into the league, and they kind of taught us, the do's and don'ts. Some lessons you got to learn the hard way, but we had a pretty good roadmap in terms of how to be a pro and how to have some longevity in this league.
Did you have chapel services? I know you did with the Giants because you just referred to the one the night before the Jets game. But I'm assuming you were able to stay connected that way with the Cowboys, with the Giants, and even with Baltimore.
Kenyon Coleman was the guy that organized our chapel services when I was down in Dallas.
Okay.
So, and we didn't actually do them in the facility. We used to actually go to restaurants one night a week. And so Kenyon was instrumental in putting those things together and having that available to us. And so it was great, man. By the time that I got to the end of my tenure with Dallas, we probably had about 20 guys that were going to those dinners.
That's good.
So, I mean, that was pretty cool to be a part of a group of men that had that and that you could see that it was important to them. Like that was one of their cornerstones. That was a pillar for them to be able to have those sessions and to be able to wrestle with those questions as young men that are coming of age in a high-profile job.
Quick break from our conversation with Chris Canty to tell you a little bit more about our friends IJM, an organization that I care so much about. And what many people don't realize is that violence right now is a threat to people around the world, particularly those who are poor. It's as much a part of daily life as hunger, disease, or homelessness, and it's often overlooked. But not by IJM. They believe that every person deserves to be safe and free from violence. And by partnering with local authorities to rescue victims of violence, bring criminals to justice, restore survivors, and strengthen justice systems, IJM is helping to protect more than 150 million people across the world from violence and oppression. But they cannot do this work alone. They need your help. They need our help. So I'm asking you to consider joining them and becoming a Freedom Partner. It's $24 or more each month, tax deductible, some of IJM's most loyal partners in the work of justice, and it helps survivors of slavery and violence from the moment they're rescued until they're fully restored. It may not seem like a lot to give, but it's life-changing, so I'm encouraging you to join me in becoming a Freedom Partner. Go to ijm.org/TF, ijm.org/TF, and become a Freedom Partner today. Now back to our conversation with Chris Canty, joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Did you feel like there were missed opportunities when you were in Dallas on the field as far as achievement? Because I remember talking to Marcus Spears, and he said, listen, that 2007,
yeah.
That's what he said.
Yeah, 2007. I can't let that one go. I tell you, if I didn't get a ring, I would lament that season even more. It was a supremely talented team. It was probably the best team that I was ever a part of from an individual talent standpoint. But as Bill Parcells used to always say, the best players don't make the best team, but the best team always wins.
Yeah.
And so that team, I think we had something like 15 Pro Bowlers that year.
Yeah, it was
sick. We had thumped the Giants twice. And so when they were rolling through in the divisional round in the playoffs, I mean, there was no question in our minds that we had already won that game. And I think some of the guys had the approach of just rolling our helmet out there. We're going to beat them because we do have so much talent. And as you know, that's not how the NFL works. And the Giants happened to be that team that was fighting and scratching and clawing to get in. They had that nail biter against the undefeated Patriots in Week 17. And that gave that team a lot of confidence going into Tampa Bay in the wild card round. They won that game. And I just think they looked at it as a house money situation. So the pressure was off of them, and we had the pressure, but we didn't have the urgency. Yeah. And so it ended up being a perfect storm, and you talk about a team that won 13 games and underachieved.
Yeah, but not only that, the Giants, they earned that because they didn't just beat you. They went to Green Bay and beat the Packers, and then they beat the undefeated Patriots. So it wasn't like just beating you was a fluke, although I do think Dallas was the better team. The Giants,
we played that game 10 times. I'm pretty sure the Cowboys will win 7 of them.
Right, exactly.
Played that game 10 times. That 2007 Cowboys team would have won 7 of them.
But you lived through that just a few years later as a member of the Giants, because it's not like when you guys won a Super Bowl, you went 15-1 and just dominated. Like, you were winning games. You had to win in Lambeau again. You had to go and beat San Francisco. Like, you were beating teams, and you witnessed that. What was it like to kind of be on the other end of that in terms of overachieving, if you will? Maybe knowing you weren't the most talented team, but we could beat anybody.
Well, I mean, for me, it was one of those things where I actually understood it. Like, I knew that it's not necessarily just about talent. It's not about, having 13, 14 wins. It's about playing your best football once you get into the postseason. And we were doing that. Like, we went to Green Bay going up against the 15-1 Packers, and we demolished them. The game was over at halftime.
Yeah.
Like with this, I think the final score ended up being 37-20. Jason, the game wasn't even that close.
Oh, I watched it. I know.
It wasn't even that close.
Yeah.
That was a butt kicking. And then we went to Candlestick, and we played the 49ers earlier in the year, and so we knew it was going to be a tough game, but we felt like we could beat them. We felt like that was a better matchup for us. Now, we were looking the week before and thanking God that the 49ers took care of the business of the New Orleans Saints, because we also played the Saints down in the Dome that year, and that didn't go so well. Like, that was a blowout for us. So we felt like San Francisco was a better matchup for us than New Orleans. Alex Smith has that long run at the end of the game, sets up the go-ahead score. They win the game, and we're like, okay, cool. Take care of Green Bay. We'll go to Candlestick. We'll beat them. And then all of a sudden we got a matchup with the Patriots, a team that the Giants have no fear of. And so that's why when you asked the question about me coming over to the set and being so relaxed and how our whole team seemed like we were relaxed, it was because we were. Because we had confidence in ourselves and each other that we could get that job done. And a lot of those guys already got that job done against an undefeated Patriots team.
Yeah. Chris Canty's our guest here on Sports Spectrum. I want to ask you for stories now. So give me your favorite Bill Parcells story to start.
Oh, favorite Bill Parcells story. So this was my rookie year, and this is probably, I think this was the second practice that we had. So Bill Parcells was a big believer in padded practices. If it wasn't full pads, it wasn't really practice. So we didn't really have a lot of OTAs. I think we had 3 OTAs. We had 3 mini camp practices with the veteran players. Now, the rookies had their separate mini camp a lot earlier, but once we got to training camp, like that's when Bill kind of came alive with the football stuff. Like the first day of practice, we had a drill called 3-spot, which is really just a toughness drill, right? He's not trying to do it to get better. He just wants to set the tone. He wants guys to be tough. We went from 3-spot to 9-on-7, which is the inside run drill. Now, keep in mind now, I'm a rookie, and I'm going against Flozell Adams and Larry Allen. So just for context. And then after that, we did live goal line. And so I'm swimming right now. Like, it's just like, this is unbelievable. So I'm coming off the knee injury and the eye injury, and I got to deal with these 2 guys in all of these run drills.
Yeah.
And so it gets down to one-on-one pass rush. And so our left tackle is Flozell. Bill wants DeMarcus, the rookie, high draft pick, to go against Flozell, get a lot of reps. And so, you go down the line in one-on-one pass rush, and I'm up next, and who's in front of me? It's Larry Allen. So our defensive line coach at the time, Casey Rogers, comes up to me, and he's like, nah, get out of there. I don't want you going up against him. And I could hear Bill Parcells screaming from across the field, hell no, Casey. He got to get them reps. He's got to learn sometime. Throw him back in there. And I could just, it's like, Bill is always watching. No matter whether you think he sees you, he could be on the other side of the field. He could be on another field. He sees everything that was going on. And that was the moment I remember. It's like, okay, this guy is going to be on me, but I know I'm going to be all the better for it. Now just try not to die against Larry Allen.
And you're still alive, thankfully.
I'm still alive. There you go.
That's a great story. How about a Tom Coughlin story, playing for Coach Coughlin?
Oh, man. So Coach Coughlin, and here's the thing. I don't even know if I necessarily want to tell his story. Okay, I got one for you. So in the midst of this 4-game losing streak, I think it was after our 3rd loss in a row, he stands up in front of the team. And this is something that resonated with me because Coach Coughlin had graduated from being a fire and brimstone coach. He was much more subdued. A lot of people attribute that to him being a grandfather and having a softer touch with his grandchildren. But after that 3rd straight loss, he comes in the room and he says, guys, I'm not against you. I'm in this with you. But it's up to you guys to do something about it. It's going to be up to you guys on what kind of team we're going to have. And, I guess that was, that embodies who Coach Coughlin was when I was with the Giants. He was like a grandfather that you didn't want to let down. He was the first person that you wanted to share your good news with, even if it had nothing to do with football. And one of the things that I loved about him is that he wasn't shy about his faith. Coach Coughlin had scriptures posted throughout the building. I mean, so it wasn't any confusion about where his strength come from, where it came from, what his source was. And I always remember he had that scripture in Mark where it says, for the King of Kings came to serve, not to be served.
Yes.
And I think that's 10:44-45. Yep. And I just, it was one of those things where it's like, this man is all about service. He's all about giving to others, using the gifts that you've been blessed with in order to help others. That is the true mark of greatness. And that's why I love Tom Coughlin.
That's a great story. All right, last one for coaches. You played for John Harbaugh as well, and he won a Super Bowl, I think, the year before you got there, and you played 3 seasons for Coach. Obviously, I've talked to Coach and got to meet him through ESPN and other places. Fantastic guy. Tell me a story from Coach Harbaugh or what he meant to you.
So I got a good one. And this is an interesting story. So this is my second year in Baltimore. And Harbs gets the word from some of the guys in the locker room that he doesn't like the music that's being played in there, profanity laced, that kind of thing. And me, I'm in my 10th year, so I'm like, listen, the coach coaches the team, but the leaders police the locker room. Like that's our safe space. So
yeah,
he gets it in his mind. He's like, you know what'll be cool? I'm gonna put a jukebox in there that is only filled with approved music, and if it's not on the jukebox, then you can't play it in the locker room. So we're breaking it down at the end of one of the practices, and one of the guys, just kind of chirps from the back. He says, ask Canty about what he thinks about the jukebox. And so he looks at me and he's like, well, what do you think? And I was like, Coach, I think it sucks. I was like, that's something that we handle. It shouldn't be left to you. I let it be known how I felt about it. Yeah. And he wasn't shy about letting it be known that he's the head coach and I'm just a player. And it was like that with me, with Harbs, throughout my tenure in Baltimore. But the one thing that we had, the common ground that we had, is that we were both willing to do whatever it takes to get this team to realize their potential. And that was the thing that to this day still connects us. I mean, John Harbaugh is a good man. To this day, still texts me, reach out to me, see how I'm doing, what's up, how you doing, how's your family, all of those different things. Like, he cared about me, and he cares about his players. And it's just, I think, he was still trying to figure out, what his style was going to be as a head coach when he didn't necessarily have the stalwarts as leaders in the locker room. Because remember, you're talking about a leadership void. When I first got there, Ray Lewis was gone. Ed Reed was gone. Sis was still there, but you were turning it over. It was a new team. And and so John had to be more of a leader. And I think he was trying to figure out the best way to do that from his position. So, it was really cool being down in Baltimore. It was a classy organization. I love Ozzie Newsome, love Steve Bisciotti. I mean, Steve Bisciotti might be the coolest owner in the NFL. He might be the coolest owner in the NFL. I'm going to tell you this. Steve Bisciotti is just – he's so humble with it, Jason. Like, he really is. Like, I remember I first met him. I said, hey, Mr. Bisciotti. He said, don't call me that. I said, call me Steve. He's
cool.
like, come here. Let me give you a ride in my golf cart off the practice field.
Nice.
He just asked me questions about my family and trying to get to know me and how I grew up. And it's just, anybody that you talk to that knows Steve Bisciotti, they always have a positive thing to say about him. Yeah. And I think that speaks volumes about that man, especially with his station.
Well, the organizations that you play with, all 3 of them, so many people that I've talked to have nothing but great things to say about being a Cowboy, certainly being with the Giants and the success they had. And then Baltimore, I mean, just look at, John Harbaugh loses, Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and kind of has to start over, bring some veterans in like yourself, but continues to win every year. And they're always in the hunt and continue to be a great team. So that's really great. I want to ask you about the transition away from the game. How hard was that for you? I mean, you had played a while and you were, I think, early 30s, 34, 35, something like that. And a lot of guys, the NFL retires them, as they tell us. For you, what was that transition like? Were you one of those guys?
Yeah, I was one of those guys. I mean, the last game I played, I had to walk off the field because I was dealing with an injury. I tore my pec, and that was it. And, it happens fast. It always happens before you think it should. But it was just one of those situations where I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be involved in the media. I just didn't know how I was going to get in. Yeah. But I had a relationship with ESPN New York because I did weekly spots the couple of years prior on the Hahn and Humpty show with Alan Hahn and Rick DiPietro and Bill Daughtry. And so I had a relationship with those guys, and they just kept inviting me to come in studio. And they said, you know what, just come until they kick you out. And they never kicked me out. And as a matter of fact, they gave me an employee key card, and they gave me, pay stubs and all this other stuff. So it's just like, that's kind of how my transition went. I thought that I might have a chance to play football in 2016. But then when I really thought about it and got to the business of starting to get ready and train for that, I realized, you know what, my body's telling me that it's time to let this go. And I'm just thankful that I had a soft place to land. I had an opportunity to work in radio in New York City, and I had a chance to do some television work for some of the networks up there. So it wasn't as bumpy as you would think it was.
That's good. Chris, this has been great, man. Last question that we ask all of our guests here on the show. It's a faith question. What are you learning from God? What's he teaching you today? This has been a crazy year, 2020, unlike any year we've ever seen. And I feel like God shows us and teaches us things all the time. What's he been teaching you and showing you right now?
Patience. And, things really don't often happen in the time that we want them to, but understanding that God's timing is perfect. There are things that you can't see. There are things that you aren't aware of. And you just got to trust that God is moving things around behind the scenes for your benefit. And in those seasons, just try to make sure that you're learning what he wants you to learn while you're in that holding pattern. And based on what's been happening in the world with the pandemic and what's been going on with all of the social injustice, I just think that God has kind of put the pause button on me in terms of some of my professional ambitions in order to get me to realize what's really important to me and to be thankful for what I have. And so that's the thing that he's working with me on right now, being patient and being grateful.
That's good. As a fan, I'm going to say Chris Canty, former Dallas Cowboys defensive lineman.
That's accurate.
Also Super Bowl champion, and I'll just kind of keep those two separate. I wish they were together. But Chris, man, this is awesome. So good to have you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your heart for the Lord, and just happy for you with all God's doing for you. And let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me on.
And many thanks to Chris Canty for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum, the Super Bowl champion, now doing great work for ESPN New York's 98.7 FM in New York City Sports Radio with DiPietro, Canty, and Rothenberg. You can listen 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on ESPN New York City. You can also give Chris a follow on Twitter at ChrisCanty99. Such a great dude, and I love that he shared his story with us here on Sports Spectrum. We're grateful for Chris. We're also grateful to our sponsors and partners today, IJM, the International Justice Mission. Check them out at ijm.org/TF. ijm.org/TF. You can become a freedom partner and join the fight with IJM against violence and oppression. ijm.org/TF. Also want to direct you to our website, sportspectrum.com. You can listen to our podcast there. Every podcast is on the homepage, the webpage, the home base for all of our content here at Sports Spectrum, right there on the website, sportspectrum.com. We also have articles, daily devotionals, all sorts of great content. I would bookmark that website and just check it out every day because there's something new there over at sportspectrum.com. Last thing I want to mention is our podcast. Whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, do us a favor, click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum. And then if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it would be amazing if you left a 5-star review of the podcast. It takes like 10 seconds, super easy, and means a lot. It helps get the word out as we continue to bring you stories and interviews like this one with Chris Canty on the intersection of sports and faith here at Sports Spectrum. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. My name is Jason Romano. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.